Greetings from Full Circle Bookstore. This is Stephen, and I have with me an author who has just released a new book. Dr. Nyla Ali Khan is an academic author and a faculty member at Rose State College here in Oklahoma City. She grew up in the foothills of the Himalayas, in Jammu and Kashmir, and has focused most of her academic career on the region's political and social ills. Her latest book is Educational Strategies for Youth Empowerment in Conflict Zones. It centers the traumatic effects of growing up in communities beset by conflict and how best to address them. Nyla, thank you for speaking with me, and congratulations on being published yet again. Why don't we start with what spurred you to write this book?
So originally, I'm from a place called Jammu and Kashmir, which is technically in India. It is a union territory in that country. And Jammu and Kashmir has been a conflict zone since 1989. So the civilian population of the former state has been torn between the forces of militarism and militancy, because of which the people of Kashmir have suffered tremendously, not just physically and economically, but psychologically and emotionally as well. And I have been in academia for a while now. I go back to Kashmir once a year, and I try to give talks at various academic institutions, not just urban, but rural as well. And I have come into contact with young people who are traumatized, young people who are not able to express themselves well, who find themselves living in constricted spaces, physically, politically, socioeconomically, as well as psychologically, because of the situation. And that led me to delve into ways in which their traumas could be addressed.
In writing this book, you also drew on knowledge of populations outside of Jammu and Kashmir. Would you give us an idea of the book's scope?
While working on this book, I came into contact with academics, activists, and clinicians who have been working in South Africa. They worked in South Africa during the apartheid era, as well as now, post-apartheid. And I also came into contact with clinicians and activists in the Balkan republics. So people who have been working in Bosnia, Serbia, Herzegovina for over 3 decades now. And I learned a lot from the trauma-informed approaches that they have been employing with their students, their patients, and the civilian population in general. Also, Stephen, I have been teaching at Rose State College and OCCC here in Oklahoma City for a while, and some of the constituencies that I have been working with come from very challenging spaces. So some of my students come from socioeconomically, politically, psychologically challenging backgrounds. I also work with students who are veterans, young people who were deployed to conflict zones like Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and several of them come back with post-traumatic stress disorder. And their traumas, unless and until we deliberately try and intentionally attempt to cure them, get transmitted to the next generation.
So trauma is undoubtedly real, but it's a rather nebulous subject. Could you explain how it manifests in young people?
Traumatized individuals are constantly in fight or flight mode. And that mode requires them to look for survival strategies and coping mechanisms that are aggressive. So such individuals, in order to protect themselves, feel that they need to have a chip on their shoulders, that they need to constantly be in aggression mode. They build these barriers around themselves, which make it difficult for others to reach out to them. And it's a false bravado. It is a false arrogance that they think protects them, but it's actually self-sabotaging. That false bravado and those barriers that they build around themselves make them incapable of growth. Because we grow intellectually, emotionally, and psychologically by interacting with one another, by learning from one another's experiences. But if we isolate ourselves because we think that isolation protects us, and if we are constantly in aggression mode and incapable of empathizing with one another, we don't grow, either intellectually or psychologically. If we believe that by exposing our vulnerabilities, we make ourselves weak and prone to attack, then again, we remain in our little cubby holes and don't really become contributing citizens.
If trauma isolates people from one another, what can an educator do to address that? Are there any specific practices you employ to get students to open up their minds?
So at institutions of higher education in Oklahoma, I have been teaching students the Rogerian method of argumentation. The Rogerian method is about recognizing the validity of everyone's point of view. So to give you a concrete example, Stephen, students of mine who are military and Navy veterans are hesitant to be critical of militarization, or are hesitant to be critical of the belligerence of the military in various parts of the world. Now, getting those students to engage in the Rogerian method of argumentation entails looking at the role of the military or militarization from several points of view. One point of view would be to laud or to commend the role of the military. The other point of view would be to be critical of the intervention of the military in democratic spaces, right? So the Rogerian method would entail role-playing. In the past, I have gotten my students who are military and Navy veterans to argue the role of the military from both sides. So I get them to embrace a pro-military stance, and then I get them to embrace an anti-military, pro-diplomacy, pro-civilian spaces stance. So that way they place themselves in the shoes of the other. And they recognize that their worldview is not the only one out there, that there are multiple points of view. There is a point of view that says we need to enhance the space for diplomatic negotiations, that we need to encourage the growth of civil society institutions and democratic spaces, that militaries belong at borders. The role of the military is to protect national security, not national interest. And by the end of that discussion, my students who are military and Navy veterans actually say, yes, we need to think about creating a common ground. And that common ground takes compromise, political accommodation, give and take. We need to listen to the point of view of those who say that the military has no role in national interest. Another example that I will give you from Kashmir real quick. Kashmir, much like Oklahoma, is a patriarchal, conservative, religious society. And I gave a talk at a college in a rural area where the audience comprised male students as well as female students. It was very interesting for me to see how the audience was segregated. So the women or female students sat on one side of the room and the male students sat on the other. During the Q&A, the male students were very vocal, and they were willing to tell me about their experiences in that conflict zone. They were also willing to ask questions about my talk. The female students were very quiet. I turned to them and said, I haven't heard from a single one of you. One of the boys got up and he said, we would love to hear from the girls. We encourage them to express themselves, but they never tell us about their experiences in this conflict zone. And a female student responded, well, our entire lives we have been told that we are foolish, that our opinions are not valid. How can we express ourselves with confidence now? So I have seen that kind of gendering as well. And it's important for me as an educator to create spaces for my students where they can cultivate the confidence to express themselves, where they can cultivate the confidence to ask for help, to ask questions without feeling foolish. And that is one thing that traumatized individuals have a difficult time doing. Traumatized individuals have a difficult time seeing their vulnerability as empowering. You see, that comes with confidence. It is only when you are a confident individual that you see your vulnerability as positive, as empowering. It's not a weakness. When I say that vulnerability is strength, I think enabling students to recognize that there are multiple worldviews out there, and that if they don't embrace the conventional one or the mainstream worldview, they would not be foolish, nor would they be aberrations. So it's important for an educator to give them that confidence and to enable students to see the heterogeneity and the diversity that make the world a beautiful place to inhabit. We live in a world that is a quilt, a mosaic, not monocultural.
Nyla's new book is titled Educational Strategies for Youth Empowerment in Conflict Zones. It is available for purchase at Full Circle Bookstore in Oklahoma City.